Here is the VGC counterpart to our previous video, the most used Pokemon of all time for singles. Go check that out if you haven't already. These Pokemon have either stood the test of time and appeared in multiple years of VGC, or they were so centralizing to the year they debuted that they shaped the metagame in their own image. Let's get started. And while we translate singles to doubles play, learn to translate languages because this video is sponsored by Mondly, who's offering 96% off for lifetime access. This top 5 language learning app is practically giving itself away at 96% off. And that's a steal because Mondly offers language lessons in over 1,320 language combinations. What do you mean by combinations, you might wonder? Is this Pokemon? Well, Mondly offers 41 foreign languages to learn from 33 native languages. So for me, my native tongue is obviously English, so I just inputted that and now I can quickly start several American English to Japanese courses. And Mondly is designed in a way to learn language speaking proficiently through daily use. To do so, it has daily lessons where I can build my proficiency in Japanese by taking 10-minute lessons every day. And the best part about it is that a lot of the content on here is practical and focused on conversations from very specific situations that you'd probably find yourself in. So for me, I selected travel as my primary reason for wanting to learn Japanese. And wouldn't you know it, there's travel specific lessons for me. All of this and more when you download Mondly. So if you want to practically steal all of this content and also support the channel to help us produce more content, click the link in the description below to take advantage of Mondly's summer sale and get 96% off lifetime access to all languages. And thank you so much to Mondly for sponsoring this video. All of the genies have had their moment in the sun, or more often, the rain. But the first one we'll visit is Tornadus. Along with his brother, these two basically charged rent to any other Pokemon foolish enough to try and step on their territory of the 2011 meta. Fitting its elemental predisposition, Tornadus' main job was to set up Tailwind with Prankster, then fire off a Flying Gem boosted acrobatics. Prankster also let it taunt opposing would-be Trick Room users, ensuring that its speed control was king on the field. 2011 had a very limited selection of Pokemon to choose from. Only Unovomons, in fact. So Tornadus could also just kind of outstat all of his competitors. Add in the fact that the meta was chock full of strong fighting types, and you had a recipe for success, even with acrobatics as its only viable flying attack. Tornadus and Thundurus were in fact so often used that a few players developed a strategy designed around exploiting their presence, Rivalry Haxorus, which took advantage of the fact that genies were locked to the male gender for a free power boost. Tornadus landed on 6 of 2011's top 8 teams, a presence only rivaled by one other Mon. Thundurus may not have offered Tailwind, but it brought a potentially even more diabolical form of speed control in the dreaded Prankster Thunderwave. It had the same fighting resistance as Tornadus, matched up well into its fellow genie, and one of the best special attack stats in the format, which it could use way better than Tornadus thanks to its reliable Thunderbolts. Thundurus was the de facto Pokemon in the format, present on almost every single serious team for its mix of disruption and power, which was among the best when fully dialed into special attack. And now it's time to talk about Ray Rizzo. We talk about Ray Rizzo's groundbreaking bulky Thundurus a lot on this channel. He deserves it. Ray took the entire competitive scene by surprise with his bold Thundurus packing a Chardy Berry for extra survivability measures that let it stick around longer than anyone expected. You know what's better than one super strong Thunderbolt? 2 very strong Thunderbolts, or a Thunderbolt and a Thunderwave, or a Hidden Power Flying thrown in for the mix. In this case, it's important to talk about Ray's Thundurus because it set the tone for Thundurus in years after. Tornadus may have fallen off after 2011, but Thundurus continued to be one of the best Pokemon in VGC for years after. Even once it started to get outmatched offensively, it was hard to turn down the sheer disruptive power Thundurus could generate all on its own. As our dear friend Aaron Cybertron Zhang knows so well, Thundurus may never have reached the near 80% usage it had in its 2011 heydays, but it's got the most World's Top 8 appearances ever at 24. If that doesn't qualify it for the high fee, you'd need the second screen of the DS to read it. It top 8'd Worlds for the first time in 2010 when Ray Rizzo won the championship with it. Then it showed up at Worlds top 8 last year too. 13 years spanned longer than any Pokemon in the game's history. In between, it's been a stalwart pick as the premier full-on support Trick Room setter. Cresselia's massive bulk and utility move pool make it one of the most reliable Pokemon to ever grace VGC. It can set Trick Room speed, it can bolster its partner with Helping Hand, and as of last year, heal its allies with with Lunar Blessing. Cresselia is the ultimate support mon, an ally any Pokemon or player would be happy to have on their side. Cresselia has peaked at over 50% usage multiple times throughout the years. In 2012, 6 of the top 8 world's top cut teams had a Cresselia, and funnily enough, most of them didn't have Trick Room. And while Ray Rizzle took home the gold with Trick Room and Swagger, ever the innovator that guy, most players use Cresselia for its bulk and access to very well. Cresselia was the most used Pokemon at Worlds the following year too, with 53% presence across the board. And finally, it was the first letter of chalk in 20 VGC history, but Cresselia stands tall for over a decade. Xerneas. To showcase the stranglehold this mon had on the VGC scene's collective mind, I'll present this tweet. One of the most reviled Pokemon of all time. And of course, that didn't stop everyone from slapping it on their team, clicking. What was Xerneas looking for? Fake out pressure to let it click Geomancy, intimidate to shore up its weaker physical defenses, and something that can pressure steel types. Any ideas? The Xerneas and Incineroar duel was perhaps only matched in synergy by how frustrating they were to play against. You had to guarantee that you had a game plan ready to deal with them, lest boosted Xerneas run over your team. Xerneas enjoyed a 60% or higher usage rate in all 3 of the first international tournaments of the year up until the North American Internationals, at which point everyone said screw this deer and pivoted to Groudon instead, leaving Xerneas at a paltry 3rd place in usage, haunt the dreams of VGC players ever after. Mega Kangaskhan was the Pokemon to beat in Gen 6 VGC. This isn't a complex Pokemon. It Mega Evolves, fakes you out for like 30% of your health, and then hits you hard again for probably 300% of your health with return, with a few power-up or sucker punches thrown in depending on the circumstance. Despite its simplicity, entire metagames lived and died around the counters to Kangaskhan, and the counters to the counters to Kangaskhan, and so on and so forth. It's how you end up with the world. It's also how you end up with the world's top 8s like 2015, and everyone knows this top 8, the rise of Chalk, where all of the teams looked the same and 6 of them had Mega Kangaskhan, and most used Mega Pokemon, but still only 3rd in usage. This is the thing with Mega Kang. Everyone knows it's broken. You know it, your opponent knows it, your friend who doesn't know Pikachu from Pachirisu knows it. So there's a ton of strategies to counter it. Over 2015 span, multiple tournaments saw huge Kangaskhan usage, only for everyone to focus on beating it the next week. And you've got to wonder, if the Pokemon weren't so simple, even boring, is there a chance it might have been used more? Thankfully, it doesn't seem like we'll have an answer to that question for a while. Chances are when you think of VGC, there's a different furry fire-type intimidator that leaps, and one of the most powerful examples of how a limited metagame can drastically. Gyarados had a rough go of it in 2017's Coco Overrun Waters, and Salamence came with its own weaknesses to common mons such as Ninetales and the other Tapus, with good matchups into Kartana, Ninetales, and Celesteela, and you've got one of the best Pokemon. Arcanine was on over 70% of top cut teams at all of North American, Latin American, and Oceania Internationals. It was rare to see a matchup on stream that didn't feature it. Come Worlds, its usage dipped to 44 out of 81 Day 2 teams, a meager 54%. But who are we kidding? That's still nuts. Every dog has its day. The only Pokemon to eclipse Arcanine's usage in 2017 was Tapu Koko. And if you remember the Arcanine usage stats, you know format has a great offensive typing and can make up for its mediocre, also worked out nicely for the format. The main ground types of 2017 were Garchomp. Presence was hard to ignore, especially with a Z Crystal placed in the mix. 75% presence at the North American Internationals, and holding strong at 5th Pokemon to ever be 7 out of the 8 world's top cut teams, top years, and another championship in 2018. But in recent years, its electric types, such as Regieleki. Typing both offensively and defensively, and an ability that lets it basically get a free stat boost of its choosing. For VGC purposes, it's even got a stab spread move that just so happens to hit some of the best Pokemon in the game super effectively. While it's not currently at the same peaks as it experienced in 2023, Fluttermane has consistently been the most used Pokemon in the game over multiple formats. Every new rule set introduces a new contender. Urshifu, Raging Bolt, Ogerpon, whatever. They all pale before Flutter. Fluttermane's staying power comes from its seemingly endless customizability, thanks in large part to the pick-a-boost ability of photosynthesis. You might think that open team sheets would make it hard to surprise your opponents, but players have developed incredibly detailed EV spreads and builds for this Pokemon that are still evolving at this moment. Over Scarlet and Violet's lifespan, we've seen fast offensive Flutter, bulky Flutter, Choice Specs Flutter, Icy Wind Flutter, even Sash Perish Song Flutter, courtesy of Wolf Glick. Look, we talk about Wolf a lot on this channel, but he's a really useful case study here. Wolf used Perish Trap Flutter, at the time an extremely rare variant, to win the Orlando Regionals in 2023. At that point, the biggest VGC tournament of all time. In January this year, he showed up to the new biggest tournament of all time, Charlotte Regionals, and used a different uncommon Flutter main move, Calm Mind, to win that tournament too. Then last month, 1 year after that Orlando win, he won Orlando again, this time with using stock standard Flutter main. The point is, over a whole year and 3 different tournament wins, Wolf was still finding new ways to use Flutter main to surprise his opponents. That's a testament to the potential of this mon as a whole. With single restricted formats on the way in and Calyrex Shadow Rider looming, Flutter main may find itself relegated to the bench for the first time in Gen 9, but it's indisputably the best and most used Pokemon of the generation. Groudon and Kyogre are an interesting pair to include in this video. To be honest, neither of them have reached the absurd usage stats we see on some other VGC Pokemon. That's not to say they haven't reached pretty high highs. Both of them have been at 50 to 60% usage before in top level competitions, but you're probably never going to see the 70 or 80% usage that other VGC stalwarts might have. That's because they're only permitted in formats along with other super powerful restricted legendaries, and those legendaries are strong in their own rights. Hell, in the current format, Groudon and Kyogre aren't even top tier picks, but it would be wrong not to mention them. Even if they've never totally centralized the metagame, they're indisputably 2 of the most impactful Pokemon to ever hit VGC. Even when they're not the inarguably best Pokemon of the format, the meta can't help being defined by their presence, whether it's in 2010, 2016, or 2020. 2016's addition of primal forms and powerful spread moves kept them as potent threats even amidst legendary power creep, and they were strong contenders in the Dynamax years, whether using the mechanic themselves or staying regular sized. Here's what it comes down to. Imagine yourself building for a restricted VGC format. Ask yourself, am I thinking about the weather? Well, if you're not, start thinking about the forecast now. Otherwise, these two are going to guarantee you have a very bad time. The king of singles is the viceroy of VGC, one of the single greatest Pokemon to ever hit the competitive field and the true genie of the healthy meta. Landorus does roll compression like no one else. In addition to the ever useful Intimidate, it's a fearsome attacker with 2 of the best spread moves in VGC history, a pivot, and a potential candidate for fighting or dark coverage via superpower and knockoff. This mon can be whatever you want it to be whenever you need it. Give it a Choice Scarf, a Life Orb, a Yacht Berry, an Assault Vest, a Rocky Helmet, whatever. Chances are Landorus will find a way to make it work. Its one consistent shortcoming, a lack of reliable flying moves, has been repeatedly repaired by the generational mechanics. In Sun and Moon, it used Z Crystals well. In Sword and Shield, it becomes a fearsome Dynamax setup attacker. And last year, it proved itself a formidable Terra user, with Terra Blast slotting in nicely for flying coverage. In addition to its longevity, Landorus has put up peak usage stats that are only rivaled by a few select Pokemon. Its absolute height was in 2015, where it was a crucial mon for basically every team because of its great matchups into, well, every single Mega Pokemon in the format. Mawile, Kang, and the other physical attackers hated its Intimidate. Charizard loathed Rock Slides. Landorus was almost always on over half of teams, and at US Nationals, it put up a jaw-dropping 73% usage stats. But the best is yet to come. At Worlds, Landorus became the only Pokemon in VGC history to have a place on every single team in the top 8, a feat only matched by Urshifu last year on a technicality because of its dual forms. The real kicker? Those 8 Landorus held 5 different items, a testament to this Pokemon's overwhelming versatility. Landorus reached similar levels of usage in 2018, its next foray in a non-restricted format, but it also was starting to face competition from a new upstart Intimidator. Who could that be? You know him, you love him, you hate him, you love to hate him. The single greatest VGC Pokemon of all time is here, and he's got the usage stats to prove it. Incineroar has been the most used Pokemon in VGC in every single format he's been available. Well, at least since he got bulked up a bit back in 2018 and got a bit more intimidating. Incineroar can fit in every team composition. There have been many times where if you're not running him, you're probably making the game harder for yourself. Chances are you know what Incineroar does already, but if somehow you've managed to escape his omnipresence, we'll review. In addition to great natural bulk, Intimidate, and an amazing defensive typing, Incineroar has a support move pool to die for, with access to Fake Out, Parting Shot, U-Turn, Knockoff, Snarl, Taunt, Roar, Will-O-Wisp, Quash. I mean, I'm getting off track here, but it's absurd how many moves they've given to this stupid cat. He's even got Throat Chop to shut down opposing parting shots and other moves from the opponent. Oh, and then he's got a base 110 attack on top of all of that, so his Flare Blitzes actually do damage. I called Xerneas the most reviled VGC Pokemon of all time earlier. Well, that's just because everyone is numb to the cat at this point. At a certain point, it's like going through exposure therapy. You've just been around it so much it no longer affects you. Incineroar has pretty much been at least at 50% usage since 2018, but his peaks are higher than almost any other competitor. In 2019, Incineroar had an over 80% usage in the top cuts of the EUIC, OCIC, and LAIC, and he was at 65% at the NAIC. At Worlds, he posted 83% usage, the highest stat ever recorded at a World Championship, and one that's not likely to be toppled anytime soon. What makes this even more staggering is that it wasn't a fluke. 2019 may have been his peak, but Incineroar put up almost the same numbers in 2022, where he stuck at a 70% usage or higher for every single international tournament, including Worlds. Players got a reprieve last year when he wasn't allowed in the format, but the good old cat is back with a vengeance for 2024, and from his current stats, it's as if he never left. Usage stats don't always tell the full story, but in this case they do. Incineroar has the highest consistent usage of any Pokemon ever, numbers that only fit the greatest VGC Pokemon ever made, and yet he's still not the highest usage VGC Pokemon of all time. Not in peaks, at least. There's one other Pokemon that's actually managed to just sneak past VGC's undisputed king, even if only for a brief moment. Generation 8's competitive VGC history was ruled by Pokemon who could best exploit the Dynamax mechanic. Think of Charizard launching off G-Max Wildfires, Zacian cutting down opposing Max Mons with Behemoth Blades, Regieleki and Thundurus and a host of other superpowered legendary Pokemon came to define Sword and Shield's history. But when the games first dropped, one unassuming Pokemon took over the meta harder than any of them would: Togekiss. That's right, this is the Pokemon that had the most dominant usage stats we've ever seen in VGC. Togekiss brought something very rare to the table: redirection combined with the offensive presence. The Pokemon's most famous redirection mons, Clefairy, Amoonguss, and yes, even the notorious Pachirisu, rarely bring offense to the table, but Togekiss was different. In addition to redirecting one of your precious 3 turns of max moves, Togekiss could fire off a big max airstreams of its own to buff its team, or it could launch spread Dazzling Gleams with a 50% chance of critting due to Scope Lens in conjunction with its ability Super Luck, cutting through any defensive boost you might have amassed from your max moves. Or it could flinch you with Air Slash, or it could yawn you, or it could helping hand its partner. Note that I say could. That's because one of Togekiss's biggest strengths was its unpredictability. At the Dallas Regionals, one of the first Pokemon tournaments of the generation, Togekiss was at an impressive 67% usage rate within the top 32. But the real interesting part comes from the top 8. 4 of the top 8 players used Togekiss. All of them were different. Justin Kruba ran Razor Claw with Flamethrower, Air Slash, Dazzling Gleam, and Follow Me. Justin Burns switched out Flamethrower for Heat Wave. Runner-up Bingji Wang opted for Helping Hand over a fire move, and champion Aaron Traylor went full support, dropping Air Slash for Yawn and the Razor Claw for Babiri Berry. Remember, this is before open team sheets, so the Togekiss on the other side of the screen is a mystery to you. Togekiss was versatile, potent in supportive and offensive roles, and it could even do both at the same time thanks to the undisputed best move of Gen 8, Max Airstream. It's not an exaggeration to say that Togekiss was one of the most dominant Pokemon of all time. At the Oceania Internationals, an absolutely staggering 29 of the top 32 teams had a Togekiss, including 7 of the top 8 teams. That's 90% usage in the top 32, the highest stats ever for an international tournament. If you go to the top 64, it's only 73%, yeah, and the Pacific Ocean is only a little deep. Okay, so technically if we measure by top 64 usage, Incineroar's got slightly higher numbers prior, but why do we have to measure it by top 64 instead of top 32? This is my channel and I can make whatever arbitrary cutoff I want. So forget Landorus, forget Incineroar. Today I'm telling you my truth, which is that the Pokemon with the highest peak VGC usage of all time is no intimidating U-turning pivot, it's Togekiss. And that's that on that. And that's it. This has been the most used Pokemon of all time in VGC. Let us know in the comments if you think we should have mentioned some other Pokemon that had impressive usage statistics. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my current these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone. And thank you so much to our Platinum tier patrons. Thank you so much to Raven Daytona Ring, Sorazan Croxon, Stoneface Colin, Bingleton, Ray, Daniel Isbeast, Glitcherton, Alex Sabo, Funky, Skylaria, and Chica Chihyo for their support of our videos.